It's a pleasure meeting you. For the folks that probably don't know me, 25 years in the enterprise software space. Formerly was CRO of a sustainability data company called Glint, and prior to that, I was head of global innovation at a company called Blue Prism. They were one of the leading companies in the robotic process automation space, which kicked off a few years back. Um, the problem that Neural Carbon is set to solve, and we'll jump in here to the slide in just a minute, but it is all about how do I convert liabilities into financeable assets. And if you, it crosses multiple in this expertise. We'll talk a lot about where the data comes from, how do we leverage AI to facilitate finding the right data to put a risk model behind. By understanding that risk model, somebody's willing to finance it. And then through the financing piece, how do I facilitate ensuring that I meet all the regulatory compliance globally, not just here in the United States, to track sustainability data that can be financed as a debt equity vehicle. So completely different way of looking at how to leverage all this disclosure information. So again, very different from probably what you're familiar with, but at the same time, money's money. We're solving the problem of where the data come from, how to expose risk, how does that risk facilitates financing, and how do people get that money to decarbonize their business operations. And so without further ado, I'll jump into my slides here in just a second. I have several the team members on my on the call here. Rameshwar, he's one of our advisors, and then Carlos Martin is one of our team members as well here at Neural Carbon. All right, I'm sharing my screen. Is it coming across yet? I know with the few people on here, it might take a little bit.
Yes, now it is.
Okay. Is this better, or do I need to make it bigger? Bigger?
And bigger and not going to hurt. There we go. That
okay,
works.
Perfect. Neural Carbon. This is the team that we have for Neural Carbon. We are all enterprise experts. One of the things that I do want to call out when I talk to different members is that it's not a bunch of kids that just graduated from Harvard. So we've done this multiple times, and I'm sure I see smiles on the face here. We all have a bit of gray in our hair. We've all lived through a lot of the battles of large Fortune 500 organizations that have these very complex systems and problems. I'm an Oracle pedigree, PeopleSoft former guy, 25 years ago, implementing supply chain, finance, HR. So these old transactional systems, I say old, but they still exist today. We have different team members here. We have Carlos here that's joined us. He comes from Blue Prism, where I came from. And then there's various different experts here. And then our chief innovation AI officer here is one of the key members that actually helped found some of the COVID vaccine leveraging causality AI. So part of our technology is all about understanding where does carbon come from? Is it in the supply chain? Does it exist in the business processes? And then how does that decarbonization process need to be deployed in order to quote unquote reduce that carbon footprint beyond just buying carbon credits? And so those are the different team members that we have. And more importantly, when we start to look at what we've done in our previous history and past, these are just what I would call NASCAR markers here that we know what we're talking about. We're industry experts in this space. But the more important thing the reason why you're here today is how does Neural Carbon solve the sustainability decarbonization problem beyond just software? Because this is about understanding what business processes and operations happening at the shop floor level in the manufacturing world, in the logistics world, regardless of what industry and sectors you're in, carbon is actually being tracked outside the US and inside the US from a financial disclosure perspective. And in many cases, it is a liability on a lot of these corporate organizations. And so our approach is three key things. Manage, when we talk about manage specifically, we're talking about how does a company like a Walmart, a Disney, a Toyota manage all the different climate disclosures and frameworks. Think of this like a very complex tax regulatory requirement and reporting standpoint. So depending on where you are in your business, whether it's in Singapore, Mexico, LATAM, Eastern Europe, wherever, you're going to have specific reporting requirements in those regions to specifically meet sustainability and decarbonization requirements. So We have an LLM model that we've built or specifically around that actually says, look, where in that business process, what information are you releasing to your shareholders and investors that touches upon those specific areas in that business, and how are you managing towards them? And the demo shows a bit of that. And then more importantly, how does those commitments that you've made to your investors applied to your internal business processes? You say or you claim that you're going to be net zero by 2030. How the hell are you doing it? And are you on target? Or are you hiring Accenture and paying them $25 million a year at a guy at Disneyland to literally click a button? So if you don't have 5% utilization on a roller coaster ride, you shut that roller coaster ride down. That's actually a use case that we're solving. So those are important, but more importantly is how do you convert that liability into an asset? An asset is that's transparent and traceable throughout the entire life cycle of that service or product or that engagement, and that's important. And then more importantly, the alignment piece. How do you as an organization from a CFO perspective all the way down to risk and compliance manage those financial compliance and these emissions on a predictable basis? You've got to meet certain criteria from a revenue standpoint every quarter, but what does that also mean when you start to expose that, hey, I have 15 million tons of carbon in my production facility that I need to reduce 20%. That doesn't mean that I need to stop producing 20% vehicles. There's a fine balance between that, and how do we align that specifically to solve those problems? And then ultimately, the reason why we're all here today is that how do companies make money out of investing in neural carbon and technologies like this? In the future, in the near future, and this is what you're seeing on these charts here, is that at a macro level, we have emissions reporting that is growing year over year, double digits, even in some areas of the world, it's triple digits. So as companies are now reporting liabilities within their financial operations and then ultimately down to their balance sheets and P&L, something's going to have to facilitate funding those decarbonization projects. And that's what you're seeing on the right-hand side. So when we talk to potential investors and VCs and angel investors, we're basically saying, look, neural carbon is going to be the future of how companies receive financing for those decarbonization projects. Just like today, you may go out and raise debt to build a new plant. You may go out and do a structured debt financing to be able to buy another company. In many cases, in the future, in the near future, how does those carbon liabilities offset by using real world solutions and reducing those carbon footprint via production and operational business practices? And that becomes a financeable opportunity. So that's what you're seeing on the right-hand side, in the sense that that orange line is corporate debt. It's been growing about 5 to 8% year over year. But what you're seeing is that because the carbon liability reporting has been growing to 20 to 40% year over year and then accelerating, that becomes the opportunity. So how do we go from $100 trillion of debt, corporate debt, and then how does that then gets accelerated or being leveraged to use on the corporate decarbonization finance? Now, the problem we're solving is multifaceted. It's not an easy problem. That's one of the reasons why this problem is a hard problem to fix. And it's not typically solved just by an ESG software that exists in the market today. Because many of those ESG software, such as Measurable, even the Salesforce Net Zero, and many other enterprise applications, even SAP has created a green ledger, requires data. It requires expertise, and then also requires a funding of these projects to be able to reduce that liability. So what you're seeing on here is there's about 150 to 200,000 companies globally that needs to just have these emissions disclosures. In many cases, the regulators, the shareholders, the investment community is basically saying, look, you have a liability here. I don't know how that's going to impact your business, but I'm concerned. And then ultimately, the why is, how do I, as an investor, a shareholder, the regulators, understand how those carbon liabilities are being managed inside a business?
Franklin Food Bank?
Excuse me? Was there a question?
Yes. You're done?
Yes.
He's on a call with somebody.
Oh, he's on a call? Okay. I didn't know if there's a
No.
What are you thinking?
Tommy, do we need to mute someone?
Yeah, I'm looking. Who was that? All right, keep going.
All right. And
I'll
then
do mine.
Oh,
I'll do that too.
ultimately, how do you manage those liabilities? How do you manage all the new requirement
I've
investments?
been talking.
And then ultimately,
I got it.
Okay. Thank you. And then that's more important about how we here at Neurocarbon manages those different facets of solving that problem. And then ultimately, when we start to look at the solution itself, we're targeting the finance and operational teams. We're understanding those business processes that engaged for the reporting piece from a scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. In many cases, we're actually connecting to a lot of the ESG software, the Oracles, the SAPs of the world, to really understand what's driving in creating those carbon emissions at the shop floor level. And then ultimately, how do you decarbonize this without having to hire an army of Accenture KPMG folks? Because there's some level of expertise, there's some level of subject matter that you need to have in order to understand the impact of deploying new business process to an existing business process. And so then the how here is that once I understand what I need to deploy, well, it's going to cost me money. How do I go out and repurpose this or get the money I need to decarbonize my business? It's not as easy as just putting solar power on a roof. And so that's where we also play in solving those and addressing those problems. Now, this is a whole new business process that I'm sharing here with the team. As many companies and organizations are very familiar with procure to pay, order to cash, and those type of business processes, there is a capture to climate finance or finance process that we're now deploying globally across the world. In the McKinsey of the world, the KPMGs of the world, the Bains of the world, in Boston Consulting have their own unique deployment. We here at Neurocarbon basically said, look, those business processes that you're seeing on the screen here, each one of those little blocks has unique properties, have unique technologies, and then they have unique opportunities and risks for managing that. And so what we're looking at from a Neurocarbon perspective is that you may have different tech, you may have different consulting teams, but we're here to help facilitate and accelerate you on that process. And what you're seeing in those little blue circles at the beginning is that, yes, there's over 500 different types of ESG software out there, but none of them really actually are solving the problem. All that they're doing is just creating a whole new report. But how do you, in essence, decarbonize your business operations? And so some quick screenshots here. Go ahead.
Real quick, Chen, we got a question from Roop. Roop? Roop, you're on mute if you have a question. Otherwise, I'll take your hand up. All right, go ahead, Chen.
Okay. I know there's a lot of consultants in the call here. The opportunity with working with Neurocarbon is the fact that on our team, we have expertise in each one of these business functions, as I would call it. And then ultimately, there's going to be a portfolio of different technologies and different service engagements that we can help facilitate with. Just some real quick screenshots, and then we'll jump into the product. This is an example of how we're managing the multiple different frameworks. We have our own LLM that we use. We collect all kinds of publicly available information to classify these organizations based upon location, product line, and apply a risk factor to associate how they compare in their business operations to others potentially. But more importantly, where have they not met specific requirements of their business operation against a certain type of framework. So if this means that you are using Verra as your carbon credit provider, are you and your business in Singapore, in Africa, meeting the Verra requirements that you're sourcing the right products from the right places? That's unknown. In many cases, customers don't have that level of data, and that's a risk factor. The next couple of slides here is a partner that we have partnered with, and maybe you've seen them, Revive. With Revive, we actually are building a process mining automation that actually entails and looks into all the different business processes and then calculating their carbon footprint to deploy that business process or analyzing that business process as is. This is important because when we start to look at the reporting requirements of all the regulators globally, it is how you classify your scope 1, scope 2, and then ultimately, how does your supply chain and all your scope 3 information facilitates you building a new car, creating a new service line. All those business processes in the creation of that carbon inside your business processes, that's what we're measuring. That's very unique to what we're doing in the market, because in many cases, by the time you report your carbon emissions in the next quarterly filing, it's too late. So regulators, financiers, banking folks are saying, we're willing to write you a check for $10 million to upgrade your facility, knowing that you are decarbonizing, but how are you using our funds? Is there a return on investment? Is there a lower risk factor that, in essence, your stock may go up because you're now decarbonizing that manufacturing processes? So this is exactly what, in essence, we're measuring. And then ultimately, there's a bunch of screenshots in here in regards to the dashboards and stuff. But the more important thing is that once we understand where in that business process that is creating the carbon, we now can tokenize that. In the demo that you'll see here in a minute, we're working with Hedera Hashgraph, and there's many other blockchains that we're also working with. But the Hedera Hashgraph at HBAR itself is what I have is available as a demo today, as the other products are still being built out. Now, I'll pause here for any questions, and then we can jump into the demo.
Roop has a question. Go ahead, Roop.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Well, I was about to ask this question in the last line. You almost answered it. So I explored this space a couple of years ago with a startup, and I reached the conclusion that most of these ESG softwares are not doing anything special. They're just creating different reports, and the accounting of carbon is the actual issue. And I'm convinced that that could not be solved without a blockchain-based solution and an NFT-based solution. So I was going to ask you, have you considered that? And apparently you have. And I would like to hear more about what you're doing with Hedera and the NFT management of decarbonization.
Absolutely, you're spot on. I've been, as a former head of innovation at Blue Prism and other organizations, when I looked at this problem, and several different team members looked at this problem, is that it's one thing to just report something, but you cannot finance. And going back to the original slide here, how do you get access to the corporate debt financing money in order to enhance your business operation? No one is going to just write you a check because you use measurable and said that, oh, you're 20% less today. There is no record, no validation, no audit of where that carbon was created and how it's different from yesterday to today. And really the only way to really do this is through some type of a blockchain technology, because that shows transparency. And once you have it on a blockchain, and one of the things you'll see here in a minute is that I can tokenize the business process. I can tokenize the variance between my actual and plan, and that becomes a primitive into how companies can evaluate my value. So with that being said, let me just jump into the product bit. One of the more important things here, as you're seeing, can you see the screen first of all? Yes, Tommy.
Yeah, I'm just unmuting. Yes, we can see it.
Yes.
So ICAP assessment, there are multiple different types of assessment. So ICAP assessment is the climate action protocol. So depending on the corporate, depending on your corporate framework, and there are multiple frameworks. That's one of the reasons why sustainability is such a really difficult thing, in the sense that you can choose multiple different frameworks. There's not a regulatory regime that says that you must do something a certain way. You just pick which one fits your criteria. In many cases, companies may have multiple assessments and multiple frameworks based upon regional operations. So that being said, you're going to have, as me as a finance person or a risk management person, I may have multiple models that it's assessing all my information that's out there. So in this situation, we did a POC for Brickfields, and so things that we would ingest their data that is publicly available and read. Again, this is through our tech, where we can read through all their reports, do a high level assessment of what's in those reports in relation to how it fits a specific framework, right? And then on top of that, it becomes a situation where, are you meeting those requirements or are you not? how far along are you in your journey to meeting the 2030 requirements that you state to your shareholders? And the more important thing is that we'll classify this based upon the various different classifications of your business units. In many cases, this is out of the box that you and your organizations may have to manage all these specific operational risks and disclosures. That's just the managed piece. In many cases, this is where you would pay the KPMGs and Accentures a lot of money to do this kind of stuff. Now, more importantly, we take this down to an operational level and say, well, this is great that you said that you're claiming to be net zero by 2030. How are you actually doing it? In many cases, this is where we partner up with Revive, where we can actually drill into those business processes that are, in essence, creating those carbon units. And by doing so, I can actually analyze where in that carbon or in that process that the carbon is actually being created. So each one of these are part of in this situation, it is the order to cash process. So each one of these processes has a carbon calculation that's associated with it. So if I'm putting a door on a Tesla, that uses energy resources, and that is then captured in that process. And that might take 1 ton of carbon. Now, if I'm an operational person, how do I then reduce that by 20%? Do I do it at night? Do I do it when electricity is cheaper? All these different facets becomes the opportunity. Now, one of the things that Roop, you had mentioned is that, how do I get this down to the level where the detail needs to be exposed as a financeable data? We then take this level of data and we can tokenize it. We can actually say, in this process, at this point of time, it used this much energy, and then that becomes my token. Now, we can expose all those as one, or as a unit, or as a monthly line item. It just depends on what the customer wants to do. And so, uniquely different about where we sit. And yes, you probably have already seen the demo with Revive with all the dashboards and operational stuff. I'm not going to get into that minutia because that's important. But the more important thing here is that we've been able to do something like this. Let me just share my other screen over here.
Roop, did you have another question real quick?
Yeah, just follow up on what you're just describing. So depending on the process, the calculation of carbon can go down to a hardware level.
Yes.
My question is, do you guys only work at the software level, or do you integrate essentially creating NFTs from data from a hardware level? If you understand where I'm
yes. So the answer is yes. We can do it at the we can do it at the P&L level, or we can go all the way down to the IoT level and say, look, it's you use 0.5 watts here. And that can be aggregated up into a finance NFT per se. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's the IoT level I'm talking about. So depending on the industry, that could be customized, and if we can figure out which IoT devices we're using, and we can track the process a data element takes from the NFT right down to the end of the process.
Exactly. And so this is important because this bridges the gap between manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, even all the way down to services, because now I have a way to expose the entire carbon footprint, not just from one specific location, but then now have traceability throughout the entire life cycle of a product or service. Can you see my screen over here on the?
Yeah, so
no.
I'll just close my comment by saying traceability and transparency is what is missing in this space, and I will challenge anybody who says it can be achieved without a blockchain solution. The fact that you guys have done it, that's awesome.
Yeah, so you should see my home screen here for my sustainability asset management. Yes or no? It should be showing. If not, I can reshare.
We're seeing the frame, and it says no portrait available.
Okay, no point. Okay, good. I can't share who we're working with, so this is just a demo environment. So that more importantly, the first thing you would see here on the screen is, hey, I have these manufacturing lines, or I have these assets that I've in essence tokenized. So those processes that you saw from Revive, it would basically be the ID and the amount of quote unquote carbon. because we don't want to expose the customer's IP. In many cases, those customers' IP is their process. So that's how we segregate that. Now, more importantly, is that's what you see here. And then in the asset contracts here, this is where it gets really interesting, because if I'm Bank of New York Mellon and I have $100 million of debt financing that I have to allocate to a sustainable project, I'd say air quotes, right? We all know how the game's played. But now I can use my typical anti-money laundering KYC process to say, hey, Tommy has this manufacturing plant in the middle of Mexico. He's got this whole decarbonization process tokenized on this blockchain thing. Who is Tommy? Is he a valid guy? Or Tommy, are you really a bad guy? And do we need to throw you in jail? So,
Well, that's going to depend on a lot about who you're talking to, but pretty good.
But all these things are built into the platform that says Tommy is a good guy. He's not going to take this money and go, do something bad with it. And then the NFT that Tommy creates has alignment to the business process inside his Oracle or PeopleSoft or whatever ERP systems. And then that's important, because that's where Revive actually pulling that data from. So we're going back to the actual source. We're not going to a spreadsheet, and that's important. And
I got a question. There's a couple of healthcare clients, and you said real quickly, and I'm going to do another one of these for healthcare specific in February, but there's a couple of healthcare people on here now. Tell me how this plays into healthcare real quick before. And by the way, I'm going to do a time check. We got like 10 minutes, so okay. I want to make sure you hit your best 10 minutes.
3 use cases. One, it's all about patient care and what systems do they use. Everybody. Unfortunately, my mom has been diagnosed with cancer. It's actually has come back, and she has to go and get a bunch of stuff done. Having seen the things that the doctors have to do in Epic and Cerner and all these different healthcare systems, is that if you're going in and getting an MRI, they have that data there. Yes, you got MRI because that created the billing, but the energy usage, these hospitals are a massive energy consumption, and many of them have made a comment to say, I'm going to reduce my carbon footprint by 20, 30, X%. So it's understanding the energy input to provide energy and resource input to providing care for patients. That's one use case. Second use case is waste. Every time they come in the room, gloves off, new gloves, trash. There's such a massive waste opportunity to reclaim that as a business unit. So that is an opportunity to reduce waste and waste consumption at the hospital level. We have a partner of ours in Toronto that we partner with that is managing actively that on our behalf. So we're going to go into the business process. We're analyzing all the different things. We tokenize all the assets and service care. We are also exposing how much waste the hospital is generating. And then we have a third-party service provider that will actually finance that to facilitate reduction. That's second. And then the third is billing. Billing's important because now we can audit. We can audit, hey, Tommy, did you really get that cast taken off at a certain time? Because we have the integration to those core systems and processes. And then that in itself provides a whole new opportunity where now you're doing re-engineering of hospitals and business processes and care. And that is, to me, it was the most exciting piece, because why, for me, selfishly, why did it take the doctor 6.5 months to diagnose my mom with pancreatic cancer? Right? Maybe if I had developed this kind of tech to be able to pinpoint all the different processes, that it would actually, AI probably would have caught that earlier. So that's a whole nother opportunity. I mean, that's kind of pie in the sky stuff, but I'm thinking more operational level type stuff.
Yeah.
No. Important things here is the fact that when it comes down to these type of things, we have, and again, we're all technical here. I'll probably on the phone here is the fact that I can tie this down to any type of Power BI. I have some sample Power BI reports and dashboards here that I can tie to as it relates to asset management. More importantly, I can now go out and see how many tokens was actually generated out on the Hedera Hashgraph, and then who owns those. And these could be different business lines. It could be operational folks. It could be the business themselves. It could be the banks. And so these account holders can be whoever. And then ultimately, I can issue and transfer those tokens as a specific value. If I'm raising $1 million to upgrade my facility, well, who now owns those assets, who now owns the rights to seeing the data of my operational efficiency over here inside Revive and then inside the core systems. I'm not going to expose everything, but they're going to see parts of that data being parsed out to them. And then ultimately, when we get down into the smart contracts, we can mint them, we can burn them. These can all be automated and completely integrated into various different tools. And the more important thing here is the fact that we have integrations back out right now to Oracle and then SAP very soon, because all this data then flows back into the ERP systems as a customization that says, oh, I have a corporate bond that I've issued out there for $100 million to upgrade my Toyota facility in Mexico that's fixing the line that's building the Toyota 4Runner, and that is in this production facility. And all that data, it then has been, this NFT has been purchased by Baker York Mellon, Baker London, Chase Bank, whoever, Tommy's investment firm, and then they're holding those assets. And we need to be able to, every time we publish a new change within our business processes, they get the update and they see full transparency. So that is Neurocarbon at a high level. There's some really cool stuff that we're also doing outside of this, but I will say that a lot of our business is outside the US. I would say 95% of our business is outside the US, mostly in LATAM, some in Eastern Europe and Asia Pac. We are a US-based company, and a lot of exciting things to announce here very soon.
I got a couple of questions for you. So talk a little bit about the water. You don't have to tell about who.
Okay.
We were talking about the water because, and then my second question, follow up to that is, then I would imagine that could be done with oil and gas, right?
Well, so there's 5 major industries we play in: manufacturing, obviously, oil and gas, energy, logistics and shipping, medical and healthcare, and that's important, and then agricultural and food development. All those 5 are very energy complex, intensive, and they are, in a sense, they're unique. But the data and the process that we have put together that you just saw here help facilitate each one of them, because it's transparency, compliance, and reporting, and then risk management. Risk management from an operational standpoint, or risk management as you are getting funding or raising funds to quote unquote decarbonize your business or to reduce those risk factors. From the water perspective, we are working with a civic organization in LATAM, city of about 350,000 people that serves 2 million people. Don't know if you know, but most countries in that part of the world only have 100 days worth of water. So with a lot of new changes of elected officials, 3 things are happening. I got to stop corruption, 1. I got to make sure that people are paying their bills based upon the consumption that they've used. So we're exposing parts of that. 2, based upon the rates and the consumption of water, how much is left? Because if one production facility is using all the water, then I can't serve 50,000 people. Somebody's going to complain. That's number 2. And then number 3, where do I now invest my capital improvements? How do I attract Tesla to come into Costa Rica to build their next plant? I have to have the infrastructure ready for those type of foreign investments. And so those are the 3 things that we're helping facilitate here in the next 60 to 120 days. I'll pause there if there's any other questions.
I just have a curious question, Cheng. This is about US versus rest of the world. So
you're not the only one who's asked that. So it's
well, you know,
I think I have an answer for you.
Yeah, you know where that goes. So the question is, the cultural sentiments in terms of decarbonization and the regulatory requirements are different around the world. You can go back to COP26 and COP27 and listen to all those debates. I'm going to rehash that. The question really is, how is the adoption of your solution, particularly in my mind, blockchain-based solution, which is the only version of truth that can exist and does exist? Everything else is just accounting jiu-jitsu. It has no meaning in mind. So what is the level of adoption you get in rest of the world and the type of narratives that exist in rest of the world versus the United States?
I would say the United States is probably 18, 24 months behind. Unfortunately, we are on two fronts, maybe three. One is primarily the decentralization, distributed ledger architecture, regulatory environment. For a CFO to go out and buy or to sell their NFTs of their tokenized business process and their carbon liability in the US would be very difficult. Now, rest of the world, Dubai, Europe, Asia Pac, they're they're 18, 24 months ahead. So that will change. I think that'll change with the new administration because they are very crypto friendly, to the point to where companies are now holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet. It's only a matter of time where they will start to tokenize their assets and their liabilities. I think that's going to happen very soon. The second piece is specifically around sustainability and decarbonization. Now, with U.S. potentially charging tariffs to imported goods, that's going to force the exporter of those goods to meet new compliance requirements on their side. So they have to, in essence, promote that they are better, faster, cheaper, greener in order to avoid paying the tariffs and taxes. So in essence, what used to be you must report to be able to not get caught. No, if you're going to sell, you got to make then inherit somebody else's. So I think it actually does us a favor here at Neural Carbon because we're seeing an uptick on that side because it's actually on supply side, not on demand side. And then number three, I think the banks themselves, the financial institutions are starting to realize, hey, I can make money on writing loans for these type of things because it's immutable. It's on a blockchain. I can drill down into the actual business process and saw that yesterday they made 20,000 units and by the way, here's the energy consumption. I don't have to wait until 6 to 9 months from now on a report.
Yeah, thank you for saying what you said. I wanted to hear from you. You said 18 to 24 months behind is America. And to me, it's not even a question of time. I mean, 2 years is a long time, but it's not even a question of time. It's a question of mindset and jumping intellectual hurdles. And I feel American companies just have not jumped those intellectual hurdles that a lot of companies in LATAM and Europe and Middle East have jumped already.
Well, there's two reasons why, and I hate to say this with a lot of folks here in the U.S. I mean, I love the U.S. Went to UT, go Longhorns, but I think that the issue here is we are so set in our ways, just like technical debts for large enterprises. For a large enterprise to understand that, hey, I have to reinvest, I have to innovate. It's harder for me as an existing infrastructure to do so versus someone in emerging countries. In those countries, they're deploying them as fast as they can. They're trying to raise money just to get their hands on new money and new capital.
Yeah.
So I need to move this along to get on time, Chen, but remind me to talk to you about Colombia because I do have contacts into Ecopetrol, ESA, we got a lot of stuff in energy there. So I'll also introduce you to somebody in oil and gas. They may, I'm not sure exactly how you would fit into their platform. It might be duplicate, but I always make the introduction for you. All right.
Guys, my contacts is here. You guys are welcome to ping me anytime. I'm happy to have a conversation with any of you, even educate you what's happening in the market. We do these talks all the time, and the team is well versed in both crypto compliance. We even have a compliance lawyer, environmental on our team, and so that's important that we share this type of engagements with you. Thank you for your time.